Putting the human back into technology with Gethin Ellis and Mark Williams. Welcome to the 4th episode of the PHIT Podcast. Here at gethinellis.com, whilst we know physical fitness is essential, our mental health is important too, and our PHIT Podcast is all about putting the human back into technology. One thing you can probably agree on is the last year has been unprecedented. So we wanted to seek out the views of technology leaders, business owners, consultants and many others from a range of different businesses and organisations and discuss with them the impact the last year has had on their business, on their humans and on their technology and how they see the future unfolding. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Learningtree's UK Managing Director Ben Kite in episode 4 of the PHIT Podcast. And just make sure you listen to the end so you can find out why Ben bought the wrong car. So welcome to episode 4 of the Putting the Human Back into Technology podcast. Today Mark and I are joined by Ben Kite, who is the Managing Director of Learningtree. I say Learningtree UK, but he's in charge of the EMEA region. And Ben, I'll just ask you to kick us off. Tell us a little bit about what you do, your business, your job role, and what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you, Gethin, and good afternoon. Learningtree is in the business of delivering mainly learning solutions. We support clients globally in delivering learning solutions, mainly in the IT, project management, and leadership spaces. And I say mainly learning because that's either in the sense of traditional learning intervention, but also providing consultancy and coaching services to support organizations on maybe wider strategic sort of transformation. Cool.
And I guess it's quite a big makeup there, but I guess is it an even sort of split between the sort of tech and the, let's call it the sort of, I don't want to call it soft skills because that's not fair. I mean the sort of like people skills.
Yes, I guess roughly speaking, I'd say that between the biggest percentage is likely to be in the technology and what I would describe as project management. That sort of encompasses the things like agile and some of those other process methodology type areas. But leadership management is strong for us. It's probably slightly dipped during the COVID period. But generally speaking, the dominant areas are IT, project management.
So you run the you run that. Is it right to call it a business unit, Ben? I'm not sure what the right term is exactly, but you run that business unit. Do you find yourself? How do you? What's your typical day or your typical week like? Do you find yourself doing a bit of everything, or do you have? Do you let people get on with it? What's your style? How do you go about doing stuff?
Yeah, it is a business unit. It is a company in its own right, but we have a parent company. Our parent company is based in the US, so my responsibility is to lead the UK and EMEA operation, which encompasses all the usual streams or lines within the business. So that's sales, that's HR, that's technology, that's operations. And program management is the main buckets that I tend to look after. There are some corporate functions, for example, marketing and product development, one or two others that sit in our corporate office in US.
Okay, all right. So clearly, different times of the month will require different focuses, and I'm sure with month ends and quarter ends and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and it will those traditional things. I mean, my background has been through sales. That's where I've kind of come from and developed, particularly within the organisation. I've been at Learningtree for 12 years. And now I look at it through a slightly different lens, whereas for half my time at Learningtree, it was very much sales focused and maybe not too much consideration of the other component parts of a successful delivery. And I'm very much now in the last few years, developing my expertise in all the other areas and making sure that I cover all the different parts of the process, particularly service delivery and operations, and a real understanding how a critical part that plays in the successful delivery of the solution.
And I guess I just I asked those questions really as a lead into one of the things we're definitely interested in is is how the last it's more than 12 months now, isn't it? How the last year or so has impacted you, your business, and that of your clients really. So just sort of obviously we set the scene a little bit now for the stuff that you do, and how's that been impacted, and how's all that changed for you, the business, and your clients?
Yeah, given that the core parts of our business are still, the bigger percentage is still in learning delivery. I quickly realized when the pandemic sort of set in that being in the business of organizing public gatherings might not have been in the business to be in. But I think we went through, like many organisations, that first phase of really the unknown, assessing the impact on our business, and that was significant. We particularly, we've got two main sides to the learning part of the business. One is the more open schedule business, where we run a schedule throughout the year, and we invite customers to take seats on an open schedule.
A public course, then, basically,
like a public course.
Right,
yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then our solutions business or on-site business, where we take exclusive courses into and deliver on a customer site. Now, that solution side of the business stayed pretty much constant, but the public business really took a hit last year for sure, and for several reasons. I think the first one being that we pivoted quite quickly as an organization to run everything fully virtual, and that's in terms of our own infrastructure as well as the delivery platform for our learning. So I think pre-COVID, the rough percentage was 30% virtual attendance versus 70% physical in class. And clearly within a number of weeks, we pivoted to 100% fully virtual. So we saw an impact in drop off or decline in business for a couple of reasons. One was the customers that weren't as accustomed to virtual learning. Mm-hmm. And number two was our international business. We had quite a lot of an international presence in our client portfolio, both in terms of our delivery, so delivering across the globe, but also customers flying in to join our public course schedule. That's from sort of mainly Central Europe and Middle East. Clearly, with the travel restriction, that caused some obvious challenges with that part of the business.
Do you find then that I suppose thinking about what you do for a living,
yes.
I'm thinking that and going, I completely get that. That sounds completely, not normal is the wrong way of describing it, but what would have happened in that time. But we've all had a fair old while now to get used to where things are. Do you see things coming back in a certain way, or do you just see? Is it going to be? You mentioned 100% virtual. Is it going to be 100% virtual forever and a day, pretty much now, as you see it? How do you see the future unfolding?
Yeah, what I did see is a progression, a sort of ripple effect from March last year. Where we had a good percentage of our customers saying, "Look, we'll wait until physical classroom training returns," and we saw that progression of customers changing their mind as time went on, as the realization set in that this wasn't going to be a short-term impact, that actually it's a decision to make at certain points during the year. We either don't get our learning and we don't move forward, or we bite the bullet and trial the virtual setup. So I think that it's not been a bad thing actually for it to have lasted as long as it had, because I think it's meant that the majority now of our client base have sampled the virtual learning, and I think many of them have been pleasantly surprised. I think many have realized the benefits that it's brought to them in terms of cost efficiencies, flexibility, and lots of other benefits that it's brought along. So, I suspect that, going forward, it will have changed the industry for good. I don't think anyone completely knows to what extent and what those proportions, those percentages that I talked about are going to look like, but it's certainly going to have shifted. And I would say that we've probably accelerated the sort of virtual learning culture by several years, over the last 12 months. I think that's what we've probably done. We've matured that thinking around virtual learning.
And just a question for me on that virtual learning subject, really, Ben. Just to sort of elaborate on what you just said, that you had to pivot a little bit, but I guess the existing infrastructure you had in place might have needed scaling to accommodate more people or whatever, but you already had the fundamentals in place when this happened. So you were probably quite nicely placed. I know it was an enforced change, but to take advantage of it a little bit as well, perhaps, or I don't know if take advantage is the right way of putting it, but you were able to cope.
Well, and yes, so you're absolutely right, and I think that's where we sort of had an advantage over in the industry over some of our competition, because we'd made a larger play on virtual learning pre-COVID. In fact, for much of the last 10 years, we've been focused on virtual learning, because it isn't just about the delivery and the choice of platform. It's it's the whole infrastructure and the wraparound services that go with that. We've spent 10 years training trainers in a virtual environment. We've spent 10 years converting our content for delivery in a virtual versus an in-class environment. So yes, the pivot was easier, and actually it's probably meant that we've had a competitive edge as a result of COVID in that regard.
Just before we move on to the next question, Geth, with you in a second, but just in the same vein, Ben, have you found that there's lots of stuff out there, isn't there, about how much lots of best practice advice about how people consume virtual things, or virtual learning in this sense, i.e., you don't sit on the course for 8 hours a day type of thing. Have you found that the way you package up your offerings, and I don't know how you've done that, but you're doing, I don't know, less one-day courses, more half-day courses, or more bite-sized stuff, that type of thing, has that changed in the last year or so?
Yeah, it has, and that's still one that we are learning a little bit as we go, if I'm honest, Mark. That's there are lots of advantages to kind of modularizing courses and enabling attendees to consume them in bite-sized chunks. I think the challenge that we've seen with it is how we're actually able to organize the actual cohorts through that type of learning intervention. That's much easier if we're delivering a closed event for a customer, because you can manage it with the customer. But when it comes to the public course offering, that's a little trickier. If you invite somebody for 3 days to come to the course, and at the end of the course, they've completed their learning, it's easier to funnel them through the process. If you've got modules scattered across a timetable, that is more challenging. And what we did trial it actually during the midst of COVID last year, and it wasn't entirely successful for that reason. You'd find, for example, that you'd have some attendees, they would miss modules in the middle, just because business just means that it gets in the way sometimes, right? You prioritize certain things, and if you've missed 2 key components in the middle, it becomes really difficult, particularly for the instructor to actually manage that class. So, I think it's a great question. It's absolutely at the the front of mind for us in terms of how we manage that and how we deal with that.
And I guess I know I said it was going to be the last question. I lied. I guess that being commercial about this, at the end of the day, you want to sell a trainer for a day, don't you? That's part of the aim for this. And if you're packaging up a half-day course, then you've got to find something else to do with the other half a day, haven't you? So there's a practical side to this as well, I guess, as a flexibility side.
Well, there is. But having said that, I think there's the fact that we've gone to virtual delivery makes that easier.
Right.
Of course, the other component to this is educate. We have an education centre in London, centre of London, with fixed classrooms, and the model used to be the instructors would have to commute and travel into London.
Sure.
And of course then the 3 or 4 days sort of worked. Well, we flipped to a model which has allowed most of our instructors to deliver virtual learning from home studio setups. That makes that a lot easier to be able to put a commercial model or proposal together for them to deliver in maybe half-day modules. And of course, you've got the flexibility of with some if you can be clever enough with the scheduling to piece two half-day modules together. Again, that's easier to do in a virtual environment. So that's all possible. I think it's more about just the logistics of keeping a learning path and keeping students on it when it's in a public course and open course environment. I think that's the challenge.
Oh, very interesting.
Thanks, Ben. Right, next question is from me then, and it kind of will link into instructors a little bit, I guess, but also a lot of other people as well. Is how do people fit into your business delivery model, and how do you utilise your human resources, for want of a better word, your most valuable asset, your people? How do they fit into what Learningtree delivers?
I mean, it's in several ways, really. We've talked about the instructor community, and I think that is obviously absolutely key to the success of Learningtrees in the instructor community. We have our model is very much an independent sort of expert consultant model, which means that we don't have any salaried trainers, and we identify the experts from within industry for within that subject matter, and then we turn them into expert facilitators of learning. And it's the combination of the two, Learningtree's experience and expertise in learning with the subject matters knowledge. And what we look for there, Gethin, is for the instructors to bring to life their real world practical experience, which we believe is so invaluable when it comes to successful learning outcomes. So that's the instructor community. And then obviously what sits behind it is we started to talk about that in terms of the area that I lead in the organization, and there's various components to that. And it starts with, I set the organization up with three main pillars. The first one is sales, and there's a sales organization or customer relations type organization, responsible for our relationships, developing relationships in our client base and finding new ones. The second pillar we've got here is our program or project management. And the reason that, and that's probably a part of the business that we introduced in the last sort of 5 years or so, in reaction really to the way our business has evolved and developed into much more of a solution-based organization, delivering multimodal learning solutions, delivering blended solutions, true blended solutions, which these days incorporate not just on-demand and physical learning, but elements of consultancy, coaching, all sorts of different components, and that needs project managing. And so, that's that second pillar, and the third one is service delivery. So those guys are responsible. That's the operational side of the business. They're responsible for making the events happen. So they'll coordinate the instructors, they'll organise the content, the learner experience, the learner journey that they're responsible for. And then we've got the other areas that are critical to supporting the internal team. So you've got technology, of course, IT, you've got HR, and you've got finance. I'm responsible for the UK parts of those teams, departments.
Cool. Okay, so quite a heavy fit.
Do you have you? How have people coped? You mentioned, a whole bunch of different types of people in that remit. How have I want to ask how people have coped, but I think what I really want to ask is, have there been any differences between the types of people and how they've coped? So, for example, have your technology people coped better or worse? Have your finance people coped better or worse? And I know that's a huge sweeping statement, to question to ask, but I'm kind of wondering whether there is anything in a theme of the sort of pressure that people have been put under and how they've coped by the discipline of what they do.
There are some generalizations to my response probably to that, Mark, and I think that if I look at sort of areas of the business, I could probably say that there were parts of sales, for example, that were probably more used to working in a hybrid environment already. A mix of home and office working, and frankly, I always used to say to the sales team, I would prefer in the nicest possible way not to see them at all, because that meant they were out meeting customers and getting in front of customers and growing our business. So, they were more used to that environment. But if I go all the way across through the company, there were teams that were less used to working in that way. And there were, if we look at our finance organization, they've perhaps been more reliant on the physical components of the office, physical filing, you've much more reliant on accounting paperwork and that kind of side of the office working. So I think they've been on the biggest learning curve to work completely digitally, and there's probably certain tasks that they've had to just change and evolve to fit. But we've done that as an organization. I've been, arguably more impressed with how we adapted as a company to pivoting not just the learning delivery virtually, but our whole structure and infrastructure as an organization. I think we proved to ourselves, and you've probably heard this before, but proved to ourselves that actually the virtual or remote working setup actually can work really well. And we've really seen some real benefits to it. I think the reason that we would want to come back and reintroduce an element of office working is because we do recognise there are components that are missing, and that sort of social, the part that isn't obvious and wasn't obvious in the beginning that now is, and those strategic type discussions which happen informally around the coffee machine, those that get together and let's plan, let's brainstorm, mind map, those kind of workshop type engagements internally,
the collaboration efforts.
Yeah, we'd like to see that come back, and of course that's not also underestimating that there are of course individuals that where it hasn't worked well for, because either they just don't, they're not the types of characters and personalities that want to work in isolation. They're feeling siloed, or perhaps they haven't got the same environment at home to work from. There's all sorts of factors to it, but generally the adaptation I think has been good.
That was one of the things that I was kind of struck with. It's like, I've been working at home for however long, and I have to travel to go to clients and various other things, but I never looked at it from the other side. It's like, obviously if you haven't got like a shed in your garden, you can go and sit and work and be out of the house, or if you're trying to do it at the edge of your bed or on a coffee table, it does add to the stress of trying to work from home. And I think right at the start, I was unappreciative of that when it first came out. I'm like, this is going to be fantastic. No one's ever going to go back to work in the office again. And then it's like, people say, well, what about this and what about that? And I didn't think of that until I was like, imagine having to do that.
Gethin knows that my kids, as I call them, Ben, they're I've got three boys, and the 23, 26 and 29, but particularly the younger two of those, it was sort of, working from home, great, and then they quickly realised actually that everything wasn't a bed of roses from that, and
yes.
They're learning their craft. What doesn't matter what they do for a living. At that age, you're learning your craft. You're learning what you're doing for a living, and they definitely benefited from going back into the office and just being able to bounce off other people that are in the office. And it's not as easy to do that with. I mean, the technology works, but somehow that experience is just not the same.
It's not, and I do feel that is a great point. I do feel for the individuals that are onboarded new into an organisation. That onboarding process. I think we're yet to realise that as an industry, what impact that's going to have. Is that stretched out that onboarding process for that reason? But your point there about bouncing off people, I think, is key. You just can't bounce off anybody. You've got to schedule a Teams meeting, and then of course what happens is you get your day's absolutely full of Teams meetings. So there are some downsides to it, but I think a blend of the two is probably where we'll end up.
And I've completely lost the plot as to what the next question is. So I'm hoping Gethin's going to keep us on track in a second.
Right. Well, make us your last one, and we'll go to the next one.
Obviously, Learningtree is a big organisation, and I have to go back over the audio and see how many regions you've got. But did you find yourselves, talking together regionally and learning from each other? Say the US and EMEA, and presumably there's a Far East region, and so on. Did you find yourselves learning from each other and seeing what worked and what didn't work in each of those areas?
Yes, we did. US being the biggest region, and of course, their sort of virtual learning culture was much more mature. I think it's fair to say than the UK. So whilst we were 30%, virtual, they were at least 50. So they were already probably a few years further forward. It'll be interesting to see when we do get back to normal as to whether we've leveled the playing field at all.
Yeah.
But what I would also observe is that the further you go across the globe, that maturity was even less. So, for example, we've got some strong relationships, customer relationships in the Middle East, and particularly in Saudi and Qatar and Kuwait. Their acceptance of virtual learning was much, much lower than ours. And that's been one of the big challenges, is, of course, they've just paused learning, or they've taken it, consumed it locally where the opportunity's risen. We made some headway with some of the big global customers from the Middle East, but it's been slow, and I sense that they'll be itching to get back to sort of face-to-face learning when they can. So there is definitely a difference there. And Sweden, we got an operating unit in Sweden, and I think that's another different culture and regionalized impact of COVID. They've taken a very different strategy to we've seen in the UK, for example. Yeah. So yes, we have done.
So culture is actually quite an interesting thing in that context, then, isn't it? About what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another.
Absolutely, yeah, I would agree with that.
Righto.
So you've got questions next, Mark. Question 4.
Oh, so this is about data and technology and cloud and all that sort of stuff, isn't it? I mean, I kind of feel like saying, well, yeah, because it's all virtual and it's in the cloud, and so on and so forth. But I think there's a question about the value and how you drive the value from that technology, Ben. And maybe clearly you're on and in and maybe done the cloud journey, but is there more to do, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and there is, and I think the way that there's a couple of things here. There's the technology first. So how do we use the technology? And I think if I look at data first, we use data for all sorts of things in our organisation. I'm looking at things like buying trend analysis. I'm looking at how do we use data to inform our product offering, timings in terms of scheduling, the public schedule in particular, that is born from booking patterns and trends. That's all driven from the the data that we piece together. But I also look at it through how we need to put data together for our customers. So in particular, in a managed service type environment, there are quite often specific requests from a customer on us to track and report on things like spend, learning history, SLAs, and that typically is sort of pulled together and presented, brought to life in a regular sort of quarterly review type meeting. There's a whole raft of different things that a customer might ask us to report on, and of course individual learners want to see learning history, pass rates, that kind of stuff. The other way in which technology has helped us beyond the virtual platform is the introduction of our learning management platform. So that's something that we have developed in-house, and essentially it's a platform that hosts a number of different components to potentially a learner journey, and that's enabled us to continue to innovate, continue to introduce new modes of learning, and house it under one roof for the customer. So usually typically co-brand it, kind of customize the user experience and give the customer much more than just in-class learning. So, we've onboarded a social learning platform, for example, which allows the customer to promote peer-to-peer learning, a much more sustainable way of learning from each other, but in a virtual environment where we're starting to use our instructors to feed into that platform, to keep it engaged, to keep an element of subject matter expertise feeding into it, to keep the community, moving forward. So that's just one example of technology and how we're using that to our advantage now beyond live learning. That's becoming a real a common request within our we're seeing that through RFPs and customer requests, that the blended learning is very much features in most requests in some shape or form, and creativity, looking for us to continue to innovate. So technology plays a key part of that for sure.
This might be a really unfair question, but looking at it through the lens of the corporate, of the buyer of those services, at the end of the day, they want their learner, I was going to say trainee, then that's the wrong word, but their learner to be effective, don't they, in the workplace once they've been on the training and so on and so forth. So how far down the road are you to I don't know whether it's data solutions or technical solutions, to actually being able to provide guidance to that buyer, that not just that they've, please don't take this the wrong way, but not just that they've attended the course and they've achieved the pass mark of whatever the quiz was at the end of the course and so on, but when they've gone back into their workplace, that has been embedded and it is being taken on, and they are effective. That education has been effective.
Yeah, and I think that's tricky to do through technology at the moment. I think that there are, what you're describing there is that sort of, final level of typically the Kirkpatrick model, where, you're looking to demonstrate return on investment. And we do that in a number of ways, but it has to be in collaboration with the customer. We've got to get, we'll support, advise and guide the customer on that, but that's got to come from them in terms of, why are they doing it in the first place? What is the business goal? What are the strategic objectives here? Our role, as far as I see it, is to make sure that we map the learning solution to help them achieve those goals, and create a mechanism for them to help them measure it. And so, there are some areas within our curriculum offering that's easier to do that than others. If you look at things like Agile, for example, there's a number of models there to try and assess agile maturity in the organization, and there's a structure to work through, and clearly if you've introduced that in the beginning and you've got that baseline assessment at the start as an organization, then you can definitely apply that sort of methodology to see how the company has moved forward. Maybe slightly more difficult to look at it through the lens of individuals, but certainly as a project and as a business transformation type project, then you can definitely look at ways in which you measure the success.
It's funny you talk about that sort of like transformation type stuff, because that actually leads on to quite a good question that I'm going to ask next, unless Mark's got something he wants to.
Loads, but I'll let you have a go.
He wants to come back with. Obviously, you're in quite a unique position, Ben, because you get to see how organisations grow and develop their staff, and how they grow and develop their processes, and it can be across the board, can't it, from different sectors and different industries. Yeah. So when you're helping your customers with that, and they're looking to let's call it digital transformation, for want of a better word, they want to bring in that digital change. They want to digitize their company. They want to take it on that technology journey. Who is best placed, in your opinion, in those organisations to drive the adoption of digital transformation and drive that change forward?
Yeah, I from what I observe, I think that's the ultimate leaders in the organisation. I think they are best placed to do that, because it's not so much about it's not so much about the actual technologies themselves. It's more about what are the business objectives and what can those technologies do for the organization. And that's why I do often we get engaged in conversation with organizations around digital transformation, and not always do they understand what it is they want to achieve. It's one of those terms that still, I think, is something that some organizations think that everyone else is doing and done, and thinks that they should be doing in some shape or form.
It's like cloud for me, digital transformation. Yeah. It's a buzzword.
Yeah.
I describe it as organizations changing from this current sort of service delivery model to using technology to really help them drive home value to that's my kind of take. And I know organizations are different. We need to do digital transformation. It's like the Dilbert cartoon, isn't it? It's like, we need to do digital transformation. Well, when should we do it? We'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah, and it becomes difficult to respond to a request. We want training in digital transformation, because it means very different things to very different organizations, and it doesn't start with the training on the technologies. It starts with the end in sight, and what does the company, what is the organization looking to improve and introduce efficiencies where, and then you work it back the other way.
Cool. So on that subject then, right? So organizations think what they want, what they're trying to achieve, and if they do work it back, what are the sort of like, if you, and I'm putting you on the spot here because I know you might not have the answer at your fingertips. What are the technologies that organizations are looking to utilize to drive that change forward? Where are the sort of big technology areas for that?
I think the obvious one is cloud, isn't it? That is where the most common area of significance is the cloud technologies, and of course that's evolving and changing all of the time. When I first got into IT training, cloud was all about just moving your physical infrastructure into the cloud, and obviously it's gone way beyond that now, and organizations really using that at the center of their digital transformation. But related, aligned to the technology, and just as important is the human element and the process. And of course, where I see organizations be most successful, it's where they've got a robust methodology to underpin the success of the technology transformation, and agile features in most of those type of conversations. It is rare to talk about a cloud transformation without the kind of DevOps, piece aligned. So, there's those are the common areas normally, and of course with that, and as that changes and evolves, it's the cyber impact. And if I look at where our curriculum has grown the most, it's going to be cloud. It's going to be agile, ways of working, and it's going to be cyber. If I look at the amount now of different, areas of cyber, the different certifications and accreditations that are offered, both to protect organizations from a governance perspective, but also the genuine, cyber threat.
Yeah. Cool.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I think we could talk about that. That's a whole other podcast on its own, I think.
Yes, yeah. I think you're probably right. Absolutely.
I think frustratingly we haven't got the time today to do that. I don't think. So perhaps just changing tack in the sort of the rundown towards the last couple of questions. I think that's near enough where we are getting in the.
Yes, mate. Got 2 to go
in the thing. So thinking about what you know now, all the stuff you know now, what advice would you give? However many years ago, I call you your younger self, Ben, right? Or indeed, others coming into, into the world of work and into the world of IT, in their 20s, etc. What would you want to pass on to you and those sorts of people?
And obviously, I haven't had a direct career in IT, so I'm answering this question with my perception of helping organisations and individuals develop in IT. And there's 2 observations. Number one is that I would advise them to focus as much on the we're not allowed to use soft skills, are we? But the personal effectiveness side of the skill set, as opposed to technology, not opposed to, as well as technology. That would be number one. Realizing that the role of technology is much broader than it was 15 years ago, right? Where you were purely judged on your skills from a hardware, software, technology perspective, and obviously the interface with the rest of the business, the ability to present business cases, build relationships, all of that good stuff, I think is critically important. What I see is if you've got that technology aptitude and skill set, and that ability to really build relationships and do the business stuff, then that's where you're really accelerating your career. So I think it would be partly that, and the second piece would be the broader range of technology skills to focus on. Where I see sort of cross-functional teams work really well, where you can easily move migrate into different teams. You're not just narrowed down a level of expertise in one area. Technology evolves and moves all the time, and if you can build it from a foundation of broad skill set in the beginning, then I think that serves you quite nicely for your career development.
And I think that's actually great advice. We're all up to some degree on this call of a certain age, and let's be honest, the pace of change is massive these days. We thought it was quite a lot 15, 20 years ago, didn't we? But it's certainly massive today, and you can be expert in something for a year or two, and then suddenly find that's no longer flavour of the month, and and people are doing it's moved on and doing some other stuff. So
those COBOL developers, mate. Those COBOL developers today, they don't know what they're missing, do they? Yeah.
But we both know there's one or two organisations out there with the big mainframes that have got the COBOL code, and they really still don't want to wreck it. So
exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot to be said. Cool. All right, thanks, Ben. We've got one last question just to finish off, mate. It's a nice, fun one, hopefully.
Okay.
Tell us a fun fact about yourself that perhaps nobody else knows, or that we're not going to know on the call anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I guess this is fun. It's a little bit embarrassing, actually. I
Even better.
we can stop the record button if you like.
So the punchline is that I recently bought a new car, or I lease cars these days. I didn't purchase it, strictly speaking, but got a new car that I realised after the event that I couldn't fit my family in. And let me explain how it happened first. So
You went and bought a 2-seater AMG Sport Mercedes and realised you've got a family of 5, right?
and it's not too far away from that. So my wife does call it the midlife crisis car. But what I did is I was in the market for an A5, an Audi A5, which is a solid family car, right?
Yeah.
And I was looking at different options, and I had a few companies looking for a deal for me. That's what I wanted. We all want a deal, don't we? So let me know when a real deal comes up. And there were one or two, but they weren't great. So I wasn't in a hurry, and I just held out until a proper deal came along. And it did. And the guy said, "Look, you've got to make a decision today, and it's a convertible. It's a soft top A5." So, that sounds nice. Yeah, that. And so spoke to the wife, and we'd been out and test drove the A5, so we knew it all worked, and boot size looks good, and away we go. So I said, yeah, that just too good to be true. If I need to sign today, I'll take it. And of course, when the guy delivered it, it's a slightly different arrangement with the soft top, and Mark knows where I'm going with it. And so I opened the door and got in, and realised there's only 2 seats in the back. There's not the 3 seats that I'd been used to and what I'd seen in every other one that I'd test driven. And not only that, when obviously for the soft top to fold back in, there's hardly any boot space. So yeah, for a family of 5, it hasn't quite worked out quite so well. My saving grace is that during COVID I haven't really had to use it too much, and we haven't had too many family outings, but I'm gonna feel the pain of that over the next 18 months. So yeah, I'm gonna be riding behind on the bicycle. I think is gonna be the plan.
It's left at home. You're not coming on holidays, you can stay home.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and it's rained ever since as well. So that's
I knew where you were going with that almost from the off, and I thought, how old is he? Surely he thought this through.
Oh dear. There we go.
Brilliant. All right, Ben. Well, thank you very much. That's the end of our questions. Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen listening. That's been Ben Kite, the Managing Director of Learningtree UK, or EMEA, Learningtree UK, and which incorporates the EMEA region. Thanks for your time, Ben. It's been brilliant.
No, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, guys.
Well, it was really interesting, that, Mark, wasn't it?
It was good, wasn't it?
Yeah. I chuckled at the buying the wrong car that doesn't fit the
I know you would have thought, he's of an age where you would have thought that through, wouldn't you?
There we go. It's funny, but it was good. What else did you find interesting, mate? What else would you?
I guess some of it is that the more you talk to people and their businesses, you realise that you don't always understand quite the range of what these businesses are doing, and in this particular case, they're not just providing training courses, are they? They're providing advice, they're providing consultancy, they're providing the platforms that people can actually do all sorts of different training on, and so I thought that was really quite interesting, just learning about what they do for a business. And I think the other thing that's quite interesting is how much thought they were clearly putting into how they had to change their business. So, clearly it's obvious that they had to change their business away from classroom training into virtual training. But then it's all about, well, how is that packaged up, and what did it mean? And we had to kit out our experts to deliver that training, and we've got to really look at the data harder to offer back to the clients the value of coming on those courses. I thought that was really, all of that insight was really quite fascinating. What about you?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I thought it was obviously quite a challenge, and the sort of public event, being in the public event business probably was not the most comfortable business to transition in during the pandemic. And how they did it was quite fascinating, and it looks like they're doing well now. Is that what's coming? Oh.
And just
really good.
The different cultures as well. We all talk about culture being important, don't we? But then you realise, we were talking about Sweden there, and obviously they have a very different approach to COVID than some of the others here in the West. And you think, oh yeah, that's it just reinforces the need to know your audience, I think, with people when you're doing this stuff.
Anyway, right, that's enough for this week. I think I'm going to let you get off. Same time next week then.
Same time next week.